Okay, so I'm asked to chair this session unexpectedly, but very delighted to do that. And our first speaker is Andrey Makarychev from Tartu, and he will talk about geo and biopolitical governance in the Black Sea region. So I'll mute our room. Floor is yours, sir.
Right, thank you for giving this opportunity to speak at this conference, and I should start with my regrets about the physical inability to join you in this conference, but definitely next time I think it's going to be much easier to travel. What I'm going to present in I think 15 minutes, right? What is the best timeline? Is a work in progress, so it's very incomplete. Basically, I will start with a theoretical frame for future research and very briefly describe a couple of case studies that I have selected, and I will finish with very vague and again very incomplete generalizations. If I can share my slides, I think I can, right? Yeah, so this is again as a work in progress. It's based on some of my previous engagements with the concept of geopolitics and biopolitics, and I think this is an interesting frame for discussing issues of different spaces and different models of region making and region unmaking. So geopolitics and biopolitics, how can we conceptualize, how can we put together these two ostensibly different frameworks? My initial step is to look at these two concepts from the perspective of intertextual analysis and basically trying to identify those interfaces or those areas in which geo and bio might be considered as two sides of the same coin. And this approach, I think, is quite helpful to discuss classical biopolitical issues related to human bodies, to human lives, in connection with issues of territoriality and geopolitical or geocultural or geoeconomic concepts. And again, coming back to different regions, including Black Sea region, but not only Black Sea region, of course, I think this is one of the possible ways of looking at the dynamics of region building and region making. In the literature, you can find many concepts that are deployed or are located in this intertextual interface. Just to give you a couple of examples, such concepts as biopolitical geopolitics, or vital geographies, or, for example, biocultural foundations of geopolitics can be identified in the literature. In urban studies, there are a couple of papers that try to play with the idea of biopolitical territories, or those territories that might be signified or conceptualized through biopolitical prism or biopolitical lens. Another kickoff point for this intertextual analysis is the idea of regional biopolitics, which was introduced by Joe Painter, and which implies a system of governance and certain tools that are aimed at developing different strategies to different regions based on their demographic, occupational, or other characteristics. And ultimately, this concept leads us to understanding how normalization and rationalization of regional populations take place, and how instruments of governance are applied to regional political economy. And if we try to translate this concept into the post-Soviet space, it definitely has some limitations, and basically due to the fact that the concept of nation-state is much less established in the post-Soviet context. And multiple cases of border contestation, separatism, irredentism, and annexation of territories, leading to what might be called geographies of violence, are good evidences of that. And I think this is also something that needs to be taken into account. My own contribution to this debate is exemplified by the concept of biopolitical regionalism that I shared with one of the journals in co-authorship with Alexander Yacek a few years ago. And the concept was applied basically to the Russian policies towards Ukraine in the context of the Russian world doctrine, but it contains some kind of conceptualization that emerges from the different cases of exceptions and deviations from, let's say, normal rules or dominant models in which people who are legal or formal residents or citizens of one country do not completely identify themselves with this country, and even in some cases would prefer to ship their group loyalties to a different political community that might be defined not necessarily in purely political, but mostly in cultural, linguistic, and civilizational terms. This is, of course, not only about Donbass, this is also about Russian-speaking populations in Baltic, at least in two Baltic states, in Estonia, where I live, and in the neighboring Latvia. And this concept of biopolitical regionalism to some extent reinforces some discrepancies between the issues of governance on the one hand and what might be called the popular geopolitics or people's geopolitics, basically reflecting the way how regular, normal people perceive or misperceive concepts related to spaces, borders, and how they inscribe or include different conspiracy theories into their mindsets, etc. So that's also something that might facilitate the external projections of biopolitical region. Again, I think the Russian world doctrine might be used as an illustrative example of that. Coming back to more, let's say, conceptual discussion on this interconnection between geopolitics and biopolitics, I would single out three different approaches that are identifiable in academic literature. So one approach would claim that biopolitical arguments from the very beginning have been a part of geopolitical logic or geopolitical reasoning. And the concept of Lebensraum is one of the evidences for that. And in line with this logic, many authors speak about the geopolitical origins of biopolitics, or they point to hybrid phenomena of geobiopolitics or biogeography. So there are different language games trying to put these concepts together. And the general logic or the general argument here is that geopolitics and biopolitics cannot be strictly delineated or distinguished from each other. They become confounded. And in fact, this is one and the same phenomenon, just looked at from different perspectives. And they are mutually mutually correlative with each other, having, of course, different, let's say, different manifestations. Geopolitics is mostly associated with state-to-state relations and international system, while biopolitics in this context refers to sovereign power over bare life or naked life, to quote from George Agamben. And there's also a discussion on how these dual technologies of geopolitics and biopolitics might work when it comes to the bordering or debordering or reshuffling of borders in Europe. And I think that's also an interesting point to discuss policies of supporting compatriots, not only within the framework of the Russian world, but also in references to such countries as Poland, for example, Hungary, and even Bulgaria Eastern Europe. So another approach would argue that geopolitics and biopolitics denote very different concepts, and they should not necessarily coincide, so we should not put them too close to each other. And this logic leads to distinguishing between different geographies of sovereignty and different geopolitics of life, or different forms of life. And these are two different and alternative ways of conceptualizing relations of power. And in this sense, biopolitics refers to a different way of looking at the world beyond the traditional geopolitical lens, and including more accent or more emphasis on people-centric perspectives of the world. And when it comes to the concept of sovereignty, this third approach might be useful for kind of looking at what might be called constitutive split between geopolitical dimension of sovereignty and biopolitical dimension of sovereignty, and these are different logics. And the third approach, and the final one, is that claims that the biopolitics is trumping over geopolitics. So biopolitics becomes increasingly important, and biopolitics to some extent substitutes the obsolete geopolitical frames. And this is an argument that is often used by those who discuss the crisis of territoriality in a globalized world. And in this context, biopolitics is referred to something that springs up or pops up from the multiple discrepancies between the world of territoriality and borders on the one hand, and the different corporeal regimes of belonging, care, and protection in which human lives and human bodies are the most important points of reference on the other hand. So these are three approaches, and what I'm doing right now, that's one of my research tracks. I'm trying to apply these approaches to three regional projects. One is a Black Sea organization named Black Sea Economic Cooperation. Another is the 3C initiatives, which exist as a project, as a geopolitical project, and Intermarium. And all of them are very, very different. Each of them has a direct or indirect relation to the Baltic, to the Black Sea region. So I think within the framework of this conference, all three might be considered as interesting examples. So if very briefly, since I think my time is running out, the 3Cs project, and Estonia, by the way, is hosting the regular next virtual, well, this year it's going to be virtual summit of 3Cs initiative. Well, again, very briefly, in a very concise way, to present it in just 1 minute. What is most important is that definitely 3Cs initiative is a geopolitical project supported and promoted by the United States. And in this sense, it might be considered as a part of the geopolitical logic of restructuring political spaces in Europe. But in the meantime, it also contains some political milestones or landmarks. For example, the documents of the 3Cs initiative indicate its interest towards digital lifestyles. And digitalization is something that is not only about technicalities, it's not only about gadgets and devices, but it's also something that changes lifestyles of especially new generation of population. Then there is another important biopolitical ingredient related to energy efficiency and climate change. It's a completely different understanding of biopolitics, but it also, I think, is important. And this is something that leads to the biopolitics of sustainable development, which is the part of the UN vocabulary, and is increasingly important, especially in terms of discussions about climate changes. If you look at the Black Sea Economic Cooperation as an organization, again, what we see is that it's based on predominant geo-economic logic as an institution. But in the meantime, also some meaningful biopolitical elements are inscribed into it. And I'll just give you 4 examples. One is collaboration or cooperation in the field of healthcare and pharmaceutics, which potentially is important, especially when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. Then there is a clear reference to the idea of green lifestyles in which agriculture also plays an important role. Another dimension of biopolitics is fighting organized crime, war on organized crime, which includes human trafficking. And human trafficking is, of course, can be discussed as a biopolitical issue. And finally, tourism and cross-border mobility and hospitality, which is part of a neoliberal industry of what might be called the production of happy life, with some references to the Italian political philosopher Giorgio Agamben, who initiated the discussion on that in explicitly biopolitical terms. The hardest case here is Intermario. Again, again, I'm just not ready to develop this argument in, let's say, in a full sense. But what I can say is that, again, Intermario has a clear geopolitical frame, but this geopolitical frame is somehow combined with a particular biopolitics of spatial belonging and authenticity. What I have noticed is that many right-wing groups and movements and even parties in certain countries that are part of this project are very sympathetic with the whole idea, and they infuse a different understanding of this space as a space for basically ethno-nativism, with some elements of tribalism and even neo-paganism, with the slogans of back to the nature. And I'm particularly referring to the Estonian supporters of Intermario, which I know a little bit more than when it comes to other countries. And just a couple of very preliminary and very general and very incomplete conclusions. Well, first is that if we come back to different theorizing of geopolitics, well, these two concepts are neither indistinguishable from each other nor divergent, leading us to completely different directions, but more mutually constitutive and mutually translatable, co-evolving and mutually reinforcing as concepts, with multiple overlaps and interconnections between them. And these overlaps and interconnections, I think, are very interesting object of study. And another and related conclusion is that many geopolitical notions that are ostensibly geopolitical might be reconceptualized or resignified from the biopolitical perspectives. And new institutional security and economic spaces that are appearing and evolving in different regions, including the Black Sea region, can be approached as a biopolitical construct, which in my view opens new research vistas for those who are interested in studies of regionalism. So I will stop here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your attention. I'm trying to stop sharing my slides.
Okay, so I understand that the next speaker is not online, so it'll be our very own Zsofia Schmidt. So please, floor is yours. And
can I just say a few words more? Because I need to disconnect, unfortunately, in like maybe 10 minutes. And I won't be able to stay for the whole duration. So if there is a chance for, 2-3 minutes of discussion, maybe we can do it right now rather than at the end of the session, if it's possible.
Sure, that is entirely possible. So questions, Professor Makarychev, please. We're waiting here for our interrogation chair. So.
Yes, thank you for your talk. This always feels like a deposition here in front of the camera. I have a methodological question, and let me play a little bit the advocatus diaboli here.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you do not conceptualize your notion of biopolitics too broad. Because if, I follow your talk and on your slides, basically everything that has to do with life falls under the category of biopolitics in your approach. So be it environment, culture, health. And I was wondering if it wouldn't make more sense to choose another terminology, like, for instance, well, politics of cultural influence or cultural politics in order to describe the phenomena that you want to see. And I think one of one of the strongest argument in favor of changing the terminology away from biopolitics to another notion would be that Foucault himself basically did not understand biopolitics in such a broad sense as you do. Foucault basically understood biopolitics as the power of a state to decide over life and death of its citizens, and I think that in a way made sense in the long in the long 19th century, with its aftermath of the two world wars in the 20th century, when there seemed to be a consensus in European societies that you were able to sacrifice a certain amount of your young men in order to have a territorial gain.
Thank you very much. This is a quite predictable question, and this is not the first time that I have to reflect upon this question after some kind of interaction with my colleagues. Well, I agree with you partly that many concepts, including biopolitics, run a risk of overgeneralization. And this is not only about biopolitics, of course. Take the concept of security, for example, that also went through these, different cycles of expanding to the spheres that have never been included into the regional understanding of security. So I think the trajectory of biopolitics are pretty much similar. But in the meantime, I would not kind of discard the validity of this concept because it's susceptible to these extensions and overextensions. I don't think that cultural approach might be a good substitute, frankly speaking, because it will require a completely different terminology and it will drive us into a different direction. Although I myself am working on a book project named Popular Biopolitics, which is exactly about mass culture creates certain perceptual frames that define our understandings of this nexus between life and politics. So in this sense, there is a space for cultural products and engagements with culture. When it comes to over broadening or over generalizing on biopolitics, well, my understanding of biopolitics includes everything that fits into this connection between the concept of life and the concept of politics. And if it's broad enough, okay, let's face it, that in this area, there are some niches not only for the state, by the way, but also for non-state biopolitics. And the idea of responsibilization that comes from the Foucauldian literature, I think, nicely reflects this non-state niche for biopolitics. But in the meantime, there is also space for institutions in this biopolitical realm or biopolitical domain. Yeah, so yes, I do understand this this critique, and each time I'm doing something like drafting text or presenting, I also have in mind this danger of over generalizing the concept.
So, Oksana, please.
Thank you so much, Andrey. I was supposed to be the official commentator. Unfortunately, we will have to consider your paper separately.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that.
Kind of, at the end, we will try to make sense of biopolitics and geopolitics in the much broader frame of this panel. My initial thoughts were very similar to what Uli said, like the usefulness of your theoretical conceptual thinking and then what you have as your empirics by selecting these 3 case studies. And I think that's every time you present your papers, you have to engage into kind of how you fit your theoretical framework with your empirics. But still, there are still many questions about how helpful is your theoretical framework, and especially when we look at the empirics, at the 3 cases you analyze. And just my questions would be, like you started to talk a little bit about the nature of these initiatives which you analyze, and you have mentioned this new role of non-state actors, and you combine 3 different initiatives which have very different setup of actors, like starting from states with the Black Sea, where states still play a key role, and especially states seen as a key security providers, and also in the second initiative, the 3 Seas initiatives, where still states play a big role, but at the same time you're including an initiative with the groups which are far-right groups, which is a totally different kind of institutional and actor setting. So I'm just trying to think theoretically how you are, how helpful is your framework to analyze such different initiatives with different setups, with different issues. And also you mentioned this expansion of security. This is another framework of securitization of everything, which could also be a legitimate framework to consider your theoretical and empirical issues without kind of complicating with geopolitics and geopolitics. Also, I'm more interested to see kind of also this new institutional setup with a more weight given to this multi-actor cooperation, where you have business as a new legitimate actors in these initiatives, and especially you mentioned the tourism and different industries where business becomes a new actor, and also the far right. So my question is, how is this changing the overall institutional infrastructure where you have such different actors to start to cooperate, and especially in the Marum, which is also analyzed as a very different type of organization? How do you make sense in one kind of bulk and one analysis of such different organizations? Thank you.
Well, in fact, this is a follow-up to the previous comment. I intentionally choose different dimensions or different facets of biopolitics just for the sake of demonstration how diverse is this area of research. And I would be very skeptical about reducing biopolitics to, let's say, 1 or 2 or 3 set of issues. Because biopolitics is always about administering and managing human lives or people's lives. It's always about defining and redefining what life is and what such concepts as people or population might mean in different contexts. So this diversity of context, I think it's something that we need just to face. We need to deal with it, and maybe better conceptualizing them exactly from the viewpoint of administering, managing different technologies, administering, managing human lives, and normalizing human lives. Again, a reference to Foucault appearance of new forms of life, a reference to Georgia Agamben. And so that's, I mean, I'm not that much concerned, and I'm not that much afraid of this diversity of biopolitical phenomena that kind of pop up in this area. Whether they affect somehow institutional settings, well, that's what I don't know, and I'm not ready to answer this question right now. Well, I would say that from my perspective, it's basically different institutions that set different frames for administering lives and normalizing lives and framing new forms of lives rather than the other way around. But this is again a very preliminary answer, and I'm sorry I cannot just, I'm not ready to go with this argument further.
Okay, at this point, we thank you very much for
for your questions and for a very interesting discussion, even if it's short.
And we're about to continue our probably most flexible session of all, and we will go to Zsofia Schmidt, who will talk about political framing in state media, exploring the Hungary system of national cooperation. And then Oksana, you will comment on her paper. So here we go, just in case. Yeah, please go ahead. Oh, sure. Just here so that they see you. Here, that's your water.
Thank you, that's very thoughtful. So yes, probably this is a surprise for everybody that I will talk about Hungary on a Black Sea region geopolitics and security panel, but I will at least try to talk about framing security in Hungarian media. So, well, my presentation is going to be a little bit different than the paper I submitted because I realized that this paper is not really suitable for a presentation. It's a long and a little boring probably, and what I want to make a case for is what I'm interested in, what I am researching is how media and politics interact, or what kind of interdependencies can be witnessed in today's Hungary. The media system in Hungary, I guess this is also not such a big surprise if I say, has changed tremendously over the past decade. You probably all remember incidents like the new media law, which was implemented in 2010 and created a media oversight board with a very well, I'm choosing my words wisely, with a very favoring Fidesz politicians, not politicians, but loyal members in the board. Then it has been described oftentimes by various researchers that actually so-called media capture has taken place by now in Hungary. Where is the time actually?
I will remind
okay.
You. Is there a way that we see Zsofia so that it's on full screen?
And this term media capture implies that certain companies, political parties, or even individuals buy media in parentheses, and then most or all of the news media institutions are operating as part of a government business cartel. This is of course a little bit of a very drastic, putting it very drastic, but what I want to make a case for is that media in a way is manipulated and inflow of information is directed in certain ways. And that also the unrestricted access to as diverse information as possible is changed. So, what else? I wanted to say that what is happening now, this is the situation, and at the same time we have also a political situation which changed a lot with the second Orban government in 2010. Basically, the so-called system of national cooperation was implemented, which is the conceptual backbone of the current government. It is more of I would call it a rhetoric concept, which circles around 5 pillars, which are work, home, family, health, and security. And maybe we can talk about this last one, how you can find traces of this system within media. And then also, I think what is important to know that, or important to highlight, that certain discursive strategies applied include framing, and framing is a theory or an approach or a method. It's a very heterogeneous debate circling around this term, which is, in fact, it's an enhancement of agenda setting. So agenda setting already, the word itself says its meaning, that certain information are placed above others, or the attention is drawn primarily to others.
Just alone.
Okay. And framing can be seen as, like I said, as an augmentation of this by placing certain narrative frames into the foreground, and also not only just giving information but also giving meaning and opinion of information. Yes, so the security debate, which is also, again, a very prominent example, but I think it's the most relatable, probably started around 2015 with the refugee crisis. We all remember more or less how the reaction of the Hungarian government was, and also how this issue was framed not only as a political issue, but also its issue as a threat to security to Hungarian nation. And this security, I think that's why I just want to emphasize it, that this security debates increased over the course of the years, and then eventually, after a lot of media coverage, these security debates also circled around this whole protecting values, Christian values, and finally resulting in ultimately resulting in the more severe immigration laws and such. So I think there's a lot of word examples which I put in my presentation, but I think it would, in my paper, it would just not be really helpful to present all of this, but you can see the increase of these topics in numbers and wordings and different examples. And I just make a claim for the fact that there is some kind of interaction between how politics are communicating, how certain pro-governmental media are communicating, and all in all, they make this whole picture of that we live in the time of the system of national cooperation, and it has also discursive aspects. It might have also political aspects, and to create a whole picture of this. I think I'm at the end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess now we will have Oksana to comment, and you can say Here?
Here? Oh.
Yeah, please, wherever you can sit here. And then just move the camera to her, and then the interrogation is here. So
So it's a very unusual session where one participant disappear, and we're glad to have Zsofia with us, who at least will be the core of our conversation. First, I would like to offer some general reflection to how to combine the papers, like the one we heard, one which was not presented. I will try to give you a short summary of the paper, which unfortunately we were not able to hear, and also Zsofia's paper on framing in Hungary. I would like to start with a 1995 Stefan Kotkin book, Magnetic Mountain, Stalinism as a Civilization. That was a very important book in Soviet studies and a big transition in the way that discourse and framing has become one of lenses through which the Soviet history started to be examined. In this book, Stefan Kotkin, he makes a step away from the previously dominant totalitarian revisionist school in Soviet history, and his claim is that the Soviet regime was not only based on coercion, or as the revisionist school would just look at the opposition to the Soviet regime, but also there was very important framing and this overall civilizational mission which was advanced by the Soviet Union. And he starts the analysis of the civilizational mission that was promoted by the Soviet Union, and overall this alternative civilization, socialist civilization, as a framing overall of the efforts to construct the Soviet Union and so on. And his argument that this framing was extremely important in addition to coercive measures and so on, as holding the Soviet Union together. Then he also published another book in the early, like a decade later, about the late perestroika period, where he returned to this framing and how important these images of the enemy. And his argument was that one of the under-regarded and underappreciated reasons of Soviet Union collapse was this destruction of the image of the enemy by Gorbachev, and this destruction of the West as the enemy of the Soviet Union. That's another has been big framing, reframing during the perestroika period. And overall, I just would like to start with these larger master frames, which we call master frames, as during the Soviet period, as Kotkin argues, there was this socialist modernity and capitalist modernity as a big master frames of providing sense to the Soviet Union. During the early post-Soviet period, there was some convergence where Russia was adopting Western values, and there was movement of Central Eastern Europe of accepting Western values. Then we have the period when again the new master frameworks of interaction was the West again becomes the enemy, and not only for Russia but also for Central Eastern Europe, with this new framing of not anymore as opposed as capitalist socialist values, but more new type of master framing as liberal versus conservative, or whatever way we call it. And in Zsofia's paper, I think it's very clearly represented this new master narratives. Also the paper which was supposed to be presented, which looks at Russia and this new anti-Western and new modernity, Russia as a new modernity, conservative, better modernity than Western decay. That's also has been discussed in this paper, which we didn't hear, but also in Zsofia's paper, this new framing of anti-Western and better modernity in Central European states vis-a-vis European Union as an imperial power imposing on Central Eastern Europe, but also much broader framing of seeing Western values as opposed to Central European values, and even more so in Russia, where this framing of Ruski Mir and anti-Western decay, it's also become a very important big framing. Leaving aside this master framing, I think they are also very important. Also, that's also the comment I would like to later to make about Zofia's paper. Like, first of all, like with Zsofia, we met, I think it was already 2 years ago in Bucharest, when we both of us started to learn what is Atlas TI. And finally, now I see the first paper, which is fruit of, I think also we had some more people present who were there, that I see the first fruit, what we learned all together, how to do coding and how to kind of make sense of frames of meaning using very concrete tools of coding and seeing how you translate frameworks of meanings into concrete results, which are, you count words and you able to show in a quantitative manner how these frames, what makes part of these frames. I think it's also, this discussion is a bit continuation the previous session, where we already started to look at how we use Atlas TI for kind of this quantitative definition of words, which is kind of also one methodology, but also it could be a limitation with like contextualization and some understanding what is actually behind these frames. My first overall comment to Zofia's paper, it's going back to these master frames, where I think that neither liberal frames, they are also not neutral. It's also very important to understand how liberal frames, they are being formed in opposition to whatever is like populist, Russia, and so on. And also in your paper, I felt like you're not enough reflective about kind of how much also this liberal frame is also not neutral. It's also important for us to frame and understand that there is also a kind of, it's not an innocent frame. Then also in your paper, I think it would be helpful to reflect a little bit more on the mechanism where in your paper I felt that you make a kind of direct link between pro-government media and reflecting directly on the Fidesz policy. I would really like to understand more what is the mechanism, how is the Fidesz party, the government, different parts within the government, also deconstructing the government and looking at different groups, it's even the party itself within the state and different parts of the state, how do they interact with the media? You mentioned the law on media, which has been adopted in 2010, but what are exactly the mechanism? Do they use the law if there is a publication which is not in line with the government policy to censor whatever is the editorial policy? Do they kind of have special connections? They have communication with the editors of these newspapers where they provide kind of comments of this. I would like to understand a little bit more, because in the paper you just make this direct connection saying pro-government media just reflects the Fidesz party policies. So I would like to understand a little bit more what are exactly the mechanism. The second also, you also assume that there is direct alignment between the system of national cooperation, and in the paper you describe this as a new social contract, as a really important how the government presents itself and how it positions this new social contract with the population of Hungary, but exactly how frames are connected to this system of national cooperation also it's not clear in the paper. Like you mentioned that there are values, but also there are these like work, you call this work, home, family, health, security. These are kind of important parts of this system of national cooperation, but we don't understand exactly how they are connected to the frames. Also in the paper, in the very beginning, you mentioned that there is really big support for the state policy and also the kind of that there is really support reflected in the votes and overall population support. Would you be able also reflect on kind of what is the popular perception of these frames which are being proposed, which are being framed through the media, but also why they resonate through the public? Or just you have just one sentence, but I would like to know more. And the last comment, I found the most interesting part of your paper when you actually start to see what are these frames, and you provide some phrases exactly what are these frames, like contextualize them. So I would like to see more of that, because it really also shows not only the words, where you have 3 words as security, values, but provide more kind of more contextualized understanding what these frames mean. Also, I found very helpful that you started to see how frames evolve over the time, because you just make it in 1 paragraph, but I think it's also in your paper you could build much more on this, because it could be also very fruitful. You just mentioned in one place that there is an evolution of these frames, but I think this is also the way to go to show more how these frames are constructed and also transformed, because it's only in one place you mentioned, but throughout the rest of the paper, the frames are very non-dynamic, where you just say there are these 3 words, but in 1 paragraph you just show the evolution of these frames. So I think there you could also work a little bit more to connect better the kind of evolution and kind of make it less static, your 3 words. But thank you overall, and think you have a lot of good material to build your PhD, and as I said, I was really happy to see Atlas TI at work.
Thank you so much. Now, time for response and then the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Oksana. This was a very detailed and helpful comment. So where should I start? Maybe I see the flaws of my paper, and that it definitely needs, and it is something I keep on struggling with, to make a better cause or a better argument for my cause, how I see this system of national cooperation in media, or that it's not only my vision, that because in my head it makes a lot of sense that it's there and you can see the traces that you read between lines. So I think that is very good to find a way to make this better understandable and graspable also in a paper, because in a PhD, of course, I have more space to expand, but also to include it in the context of a paper. Secondly, I think with this popular, it was at the beginning of my paper, and the popularity claim was just simply about the continuous re-election. So maybe it was sort of just as a catchy beginning. So maybe I should rephrase this in a more less misleading way. And then also on the whole media situation in Hungary. So when I proposed this paper in a different way elsewhere, I got a comment that it's too long on explain in each and everything what has happened in Hungary since. So I shortened it, and now I see that it's too short and it doesn't give enough material to get the context. So I guess I have to find a middle ground still to approach this. Yes. I think these are my comments.
So now questions from the audience. Sandra, please. Do you like to sit here? Or?
No.
So it's just a really short question about methodology. I think you're using Ruth Wodak. Is that correct? Did I get that? No. Mm-hmm. So then I was wondering if you can actually say something about the methodology.
Mm-hmm. So mainly my approach, I don't see you, Sandra, I will talk to the Zoya. So my theory is framing, and framing is also in certain terms considered as an approach, but this approach is of course supported by qualitative content analysis. That's my method.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, that means that I gather a corpus of text, a lot of text, and then I code them an atlas TI. That's very simply put how I'm approaching this. And this is very time consuming, and it's well, I would use the corpus in that sense that I picked only 3 main in the way that according to statistics they have a lot of, or the most read online media, and that's how I limit myself. And then I have a time frame from 2010 to 2018.
Okay. Other questions? Please.
Can I ask it from back here?
I'm not sure if it's heard though. I can repeat your question. We still have time.
Maybe this is not in your interest at all, maybe this is tangential, but you mentioned the migration so-called crisis in quotation mark. Can you elaborate a little bit on that with the policy?
Okay. You mean elaborate in a way what is going on? I don't know.
Yes, the connection.
Okay. I think the connection, this is also, it's more and more a work in progress. Yet my hypothesis or my assumption that there is some kind of connection that well, also I think this is not something really overwhelmingly new, that media influence politics and that they positively and negatively, what also Oksana mentioned, that framing can be also in 2 directions, and that there is a correlation how certain issues become relevant and then are turned also into policies, for example. That is simply my the lead I'm following or trying to follow. How this, if this actually is, if there's any traces for this.
All right. So no news from the third speaker. So Chris Costa from Schiller International University of Madrid. That remains anonymous. Unfortunately, we can't present him. So any other questions? If not, okay, please.
Thank you for the interesting talk. My question would be, what kind of media the government prefers for its framing? Traditional media, printed media, electronic media?
I think TV is the most preferable, but I chose online media as because of sort of how this whole shift to online media globally, and then specifically how it is reflected in the Hungarian case.
I will use the moment to ask. The one question what I'm interested is probably which is the target audience, I suppose, of the government, which this whole ideologization of nationalism and framing of this national project. Who are they particularly targeting? Which is the most attractive group? Basically, is it like divided by gender or more by, I guess, other categories? I'm interested who are the main target, if you can elaborate on that.
I think it's definitely the core voters, so to keep the people on track. And I think also in a way younger people are with this shift to online, and also with Facebook presence and some have also Instagram. So I think it's not I couldn't say like this is maybe.
So there is no backbone that they kind of particularly. For example, in Russia or Ukraine, we can see clear division based on the age group, for example, that this age group is particularly attractive and very loyal to the government. So let's just ignore the others and just focus fully on them. So there is no...
No, I don't want to make a say for things now, because I think it's a very delicate issue to address now. With that one.
Okay. Okay. Please, Alexei.
I'm sorry if you, so I only looked through your paper very carefully if you already touched it. So as Sandra mentioned, this migration issue in the media, and as far as I understand from brief look into your paper, it's really related to criticism of Brussels and EU. But so if we are looking a bit for the future, and is the general tendency when a lot of these critical ideas about international policy, about relations with neighbors, are projecting into EU, how do you see perspectives of relations with EU in terms of state policy, so not in terms of internal relations with general European Union, but in the policy and in the media that you analyze, what tendencies you see for describing EU and how it's in general influence the relations with Brussels?
I think in a way it's very clearly against Brussels and against this conditionality, and there's a lot of discourse, but at the same time it's also it's a little bit ambivalent, because of course there is a will to remain in the European Union and to take part in the European decision-making processes. So I just remember these kind of incidents when Orban went to speak up against the St.Gallen report, and so I think there's a lot of discourse going on, and I think also in a way this whole periphery and center discourse is very volatile, and then also now with the V4 strengthening, and then there's emphasis on this, that also the smaller countries within the European Union have a word to say and want to make a claim for their causes.
Elena, please.
The case of Central European University is a huge topic here in Western European media. What about Hungary? It's also a huge issue. Can you say a few words, if you are aware of this case, about the discussion of this case in Hungary, and also about other cases of academic freedom and pressing of academic institutions in Hungary?
Well, I think this is more of a personal account then, because I happened to be, I had a scholarship at the Central European University last year, and it was amidst of this, well, there was a movement against the political situation going on and the oppression of Central European University, well, I think it was on a weekly basis that these protests formed, and then also other Hungarian universities joined, and so it became of a thing. And then also the case of the Academy of Science. So I guess it was a huge topic, and yes, that's my quick answer.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Please. Andrey.
Yes. Yes. Your study finished in 2018. Now, Hungary has also taken a very strong attitude towards the new refugee crisis in 2020. is that an attempt to redo the success of the previous policy, or is this a new policy?
It's a new one, like a new attempt to.
Yes, but is it an attempt really to rework what happened in 2015, where Hungary was very successful in drawing the population to its position on the refugee crisis?
Wow, I could imagine so. Yes, it is, why change a bit recipe?
Yes, please.
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much. I just read so very briefly your paper. And first of all, let me say that I really believe that it's important to write about it and to say a word about it on an international level. And my question is partially or related what Oksana pointed out, that I also agree that it would be very interesting to see how these frames, how the different topics evolved since 2010. So my question would be the same: that, do you plan to follow certain codes, or what you use in the atlas? How did they develop throughout the years? And maybe the second is that, do you also plan to analyze it in an international context? I mean, in comparison to what is happening in Poland?
Thank you very much. I think yes, that is what I'm trying to do, and then also what Andrey said. Of course, it could be prolonged now, even after now it's 2020. But I think this time frame, the 8 years, and then seeing the evolution is what I'm aiming at. Of course, this is a very it's a lot of work, and ideally it would be the idea to have all three showing their evolution. Well, I think comparison is something I don't really integrate, because also I don't know Polish, and I think that's already would make my work very much harder.
Other questions? Okay, so let's give a warm thank you to the panelists and discussant. And we're off and racing to the lunch, right?